Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I'm your host, Sunil Lalla. Joining us this evening is the newly appointed Chief Executive Officer of the Water and Sewerage Authority. It's better known as Wasa. Joining us today is Mr. Keithroy Halliday. Good evening, Mr. Halliday, and welcome to Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to Delving Deeper.
Thank you, Sunil. Pleasure to be here.
In applying for the post for Chief Executive Officer of Wasa, you would have obviously done some research on the post in terms of the operations and structure of the utility company. What were your initial thoughts?
When I looked at Wasa compared to, for instance, Barbados Water Authority or any other utility to the Caribbean, what I'm seeing are significant similarities, significant commonalities. Outside of scope, outside of geography, the challenges are all the same, the successes are all the same. And whenever you look at the utilities to the Caribbean, you realize that they're being plagued, for example, with age, piping and infrastructure. We have similar, even governance type issues. We have similar staff challenges. And because water as an essential supply, as an essential commodity, is mostly state-owned, all of the issues that we encounter in that regard are also very similar.
You would have spent an enormous amount of time at the Barbados Water Authority, I understand. How do you see these similarities and the differences going forward, and what can you bring to the table?
In Barbados, when I first joined the authority there, some of the challenges we had, for instance, one in particular which was very significant was that we had sewage on the street. And we had to really galvanize all of the staff and galvanize all of the technical skills that were available to turn that situation around. I look, for instance, even now at Wasa and for your experience in some of your lowest reservoir levels in what should be arguably so your best period or your wettest period of the year. Another challenge. When I was also in with the Barbados Water Authority, staff were feeling demotivated as a consequence of that. Staff were not engaged and they were not keen and eager to do what they should do. I think Wasa has a slightly advanced position in the sense that over the last year, 2 years in particular, we've started to see that shift, started to see that turnaround. So stepping into the position of CEO at Wasa is perhaps a little easier than it would have been when I stepped into or assumed the position of CEO in the BWA. I think that the potential for Wasa is tremendous. For what I've seen in the past week, I've seen a very productive, a very willing and eager staff, a very willing and eager workforce. And that, for me, is encouraging, and that is part of some of the things I would have seen initially in contemplating the move to Wasa.
I know you talked about, in the Caribbean, we have certain similarities in terms of, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and other islands as well. But there's always the notion, Mr. Halliday, that we live around water and we always have water issues.
Yes.
Your take on that?
Well, living around water or having water surrounding you is not necessarily same thing as having access to water. Salt water is not water. And the Caribbean islands in particular, there's several sources of water that are usable. You either use the salt water through a desalination process, reverse osmosis process, to make it potable or to make it usable, or you use surface water which you can then treat, or you use water which you extract from the aquifer, groundwater. And it's a combination of those three in which you're able to produce sufficient water to satisfy the needs of the country. So in Trinidad, you have a lot of surface water that is being used. We still have some elements of groundwater, and increasingly so, where we're moving more and more towards looking at localized sources. At some point in time, there may be more development on the soil, I'm not sure, but I have to sit and see what's going on. In Barbados, for instance, if I can use that as an easy example, 23% of the water is produced from through a desalinated plant. But outside of that, all of the other water sources are groundwater. There really aren't any surface water in terms of supplies. Then if you go to look at St. Vincent, you look at Dominica, most of the water supply is from surface water as well. So again, scope, geography, that pretty much defines where you spend your money, where you get the best bang for the buck, and the treatment of the type of water that you'll get. So in that sense, while I'm saying there's some similarities, it varies from island to island.
As we're talking about desalinated water, Mr. Halliday, Trinidad and Tobago has a desalination plant. What are your initial thoughts on it, and how can we improve the service going forward?
Desalination water is an expensive form of water supply. For us, it is usually not the first resort or not the first line of production. At the end of the day, you want to produce as economical a product, for the consumer. So whenever we look at desalinated water, it's in areas where we simply cannot produce any additional water. As I get more and more into the company, into the authority, I'll understand what the composition is and what is required. But that is not a decision you just make on the surface. You have to do a careful analysis. You have to establish what the water balance of the country is. When we talk about water balance, you have to look at the sources are coming from. Is there room for additional groundwater? Do we need to tap into more surface water? What do we need to do to make this production more resilient so that when you have dry season, you're not found caught? Is there another form of production of water outside of any of these two sources, which may be desal? And desalination comes in two forms. You can either desalinate seawater or you can desalinate brackish water. So depending on what you're looking at, then you know what your makeup for that water balance should be. More and more as well, we'll look at the area of reclaimed water, and this is something that's becoming a worldwide phenomenon because of the necessity. Water that goes into, for instance, your wastewater plants, most of that, the effluent, is either discharged to the sea or discharged down into the ground. And we have started to look, and I'm saying we from a worldwide perspective, as whether or not we can make more productive use of that water once it's treated and clean. For instance, is it suitable for some agriculture? Can we use it in some industries? And can we use it for non-potable water where you wash down facilities, et cetera, et cetera? So looking at the water balance is first key before you decide and determine desalination water is the way to go.
You spent basically a full week on the job so far at the Water and Sewerage Authority. What were your initial thoughts, and is it what you expected?
Some would argue I spent 3 weeks. That's how the first week has felt, but joyfully so. It has been remarkably interesting. It has helped to center the executive leadership team that just started. It has helped to center me in terms of focus as well, from the point of view that what we are seeing is an extraordinary workforce. And I know Wasa has been the brunt of complaints and bad noise, as it were, for the last little while. But what I've heard is not what I'm seeing on the ground, and perhaps is a question of engaging the staff, perhaps is a question of interaction. But what I'm seeing is a very eager workforce who wants to do right by the country, right by the consumer, and who wants to be able to produce at the level that is required. The mandate for Wasa is a significant one, which is to deliver water on a 24-hour basis, as much as it possibly can across the length and breadth of Trinidad. And when I started on Sunday and started doing tours and meeting with the staff, I discovered that everyone is fairly committed to that. They have had some challenges in meeting that commitment, and some of those are well known. But I've done over 25 presentations. Each presentation lasts at least 20 minutes. We have sat down and I spoke to the staff and engaged them. And I've chose to start there initially because unless you understand where the staff is, or unless you understand where they're at, then there's no sense in trying to lead them or govern or guide or manage. So we started that. And the management team will tell you that I asked them to step aside. I've also, during the course of the week, met with all of the unions and through courtesy calls, and I've asked them as well, don't give me your stories yet. Let me speak to the staff. When I've heard from the staff, then I'm willing to listen to you and I'm listening to management, and then we can determine what makes sense to help right size whatever needs to be done going forward. So this week has been extremely eventful. There have been very long days. I've seen quite a number of facilities as vast as they are small. But what intrigues me the most is the fact that I met staff who were very, very open, very, very willing to engage, and who have all committed to helping us turn this organization even further around, more around, I should say.
There are some who question the appointment of a foreign national for the post of Chief Executive Officer of Wasa. What would you say qualifies you to be in this post?
Trinidadians work all over the Caribbean, all over the world. Bajans work all over the world, all over the Caribbean. Kititians work all over the world, all over the Caribbean. I think the term foreigner among West Indians or Caribbean countries is a misnomer. I don't think there's anything else to be said.
I don't want to make too much comparisons between the Barbados Water Authority and Wasa, but do you think your remuneration package here at Wasa is fitting enough for the post?
I see that everyone gets caught up in the dollar figure, but no one seems to be understand or to look very carefully at the value and the type of work that is required. And I think right now we have to turn the conversation slightly and look at what is it that we're seeking to do at Wasa. What is the value that we're seeking to achieve? In the last several years, decades perhaps, Wasa has tried violently to move the needle somewhat in terms of trying to turn the company around, in terms of trying to make the authority for the better. And in the last 2 years, a transformation committee was put in place to help position or to bring us to this particular point where we can then start making the necessary change or transformation. And I will tell you that the discussion I've had with all of the staff this week particularly is that transformation is not some airy-fairy thing that's up there in the air. Transformation is a set of incremental processes or steps that all of us must take, for all staff must be involved, including the media as a stakeholder, including our unions, including our board, including our ministry. And therefore, if we look at it in terms of that, that's where we're going to be able to make the needle. That is the focus I'll rather take in terms of looking to see how can we get the right person, the right team in place, and look at value for money in that respect.
Your appointment is part of the transformation plan for Wasa.
Yes.
Do you have set goals in terms of short, medium, and long-term goals?
A lot of those are being refined. We do. We would have met initially as an executive leadership team, even prior to Sunday. We would have sat and had a number of discussions. Some of the discussions we had, for instance, centered on what exactly are we supposed to do as a leader? What is a leader in the Wasa context? What is our purpose? What are we aiming to achieve? What are we looking to achieve in the next 3 months, 6 months, a year? Taking into account principally, if not foremost, our mandate. So whatever we do, we have to focus on the delivery of water on a 24-hour basis. So all of the short-term, all of the medium, all of the long-term goals have that clearly in focus. That is not to say we have divorced ourselves from the reality of cash flow, we divorced ourselves from the reality of making money, or we have divorced ourselves from any other issues. So there has been a primary focus, of course, on staff and its well-being, staff and health and safety, staff and care for staff. And this is the kind of conversations we've had in the last week in order to make sure that staff understands that they are our primary and best resource. Making sure we treat to that then allows us to be able to move forward on some of our other targets. But primarily we have an overriding mandate, and all of the other mandates, all of the other goals and targets we have are in support of that.
Realistically speaking, do you think the water problem, the water issue in Trinidad and Tobago could be solved? Because I asked the question because I recently was scrolling through social media and I saw an article, I'm not sure the validity of it, but I saw an article back in the 1960s or 70s saying that, Wasa's water problem would be solved in the next 5 years. And some people may think, this transformation plan for Wasa is somewhat of a pie in the sky thinking, but do you think realistically we can solve that problem?
Yes, and I say so. I would say absolutely. This is the same task or challenge that all Caribbean utilities have had. And that is some of the areas of similarities or commonalities that they share. This is the 21st century. This is the year 2024. And I can tell you that none of the staff in Wasa, not the board or the ministry, are satisfied that in this day and age we still have an element of unserved and underserved in this country when we have it within our capacity to do better. It may cost us considerably, and we may not be able to get it all done by the next month or two, but as long as you remain focused and the will is there at every level and you budget accordingly going forward, you will get there. In the last year, if you look at what has happened in terms of the execution of our jobs, We have gone from, I'm told, from an average of 23% to 85% in our success execution. If you look at what is happening in the south and our ability to produce and send more water, I'm just using that as the most recent example simply because we've had a lot of success recently in that area, because that's an area that we've had a lot of chief complaints about. But we have made remarkable inroads. And that is in spite of the climate change challenges. That is in spite of an aging infrastructure. That is in spite of the fact that Wasa has been beaten up over and over again. And that is in spite of the fact that we have had to marshal and motivate the workforce to stay engaged, to stand up for their brand, to be proud and to move forward. So if you were to ask me the question they're asking against all us, absolutely, we can do that.
We talked about age pipeline, age infrastructure, and so on. Do you think this is going to take a lot of revenue to fix the water situation in the country in terms of, fixing leaks and so on as well?
Pipes replacement comes at a considerable cost. You can't just repair pipes when they've aged to a certain point. You have to replace all of it. And coming back from what we used to say Victorian or British times, when these utility companies were put in place, whether it's 100 or 150 years ago, we do not have the money that we had back then to be able to turn and to be able to change or maintain the pipes. But it is a multifaceted approach. We get non-revenue water because of aging infrastructure, and therefore we must replace the pipes, because if for a reason you're pumping 1 million gallons of water but you're losing 500,000 gallons, that's considerable waste. That's a lot of money you're wasting money on trying to produce and send to the public. Not only that, that's 500,000 gallons that you're not able to collect revenue on because you're not able to send it to where it's desired. So that is a key element of making sure that we get to the point where we can produce enough revenue to cover the costs and to cover the repairs and the capex. Aside from that, there are some areas of efficiency that we must tackle. And outside of that, we lose money because we're not billing correctly, or we're not generating the revenue that we should because people are not billed correctly. We're not collecting the money. We're not managing that side of the business. And while sometimes that's a difficult thing to face, there's some hard questions from time to time we have to ask, and there's some hard decisions from time to time we have to make. But if it is that you want to make sure that Wasa as a commercial state-owned entity does what it should do, these are questions we have to face and answer in conjunction with the public and in conjunction with our stakeholders as well.
As part of the transformation, the utility company has embarked on certain projects or initiatives to improve the water supply in certain areas. In your instance, what percentage of the population do you think receives a 24/7 supply, and what percentage receives a reliable water supply?
As far as I understand it, we're very close to at least, on average, 24/3 the supply across the country. That's the average. There are some who receive 24/7, there's some who receive less, and we have had some challenges where some are receiving even less than that, and those are the areas that we have targeted. The projects that we have, whether they're IID funded, government funded, or otherwise, CWIT, IIDB, whatever the case may be, PSIP, those are all progressing very, very well, and even more aggressively over the past year. I think that the focus for us has been not just about only building a fancy treatment plant. The focus for us has been looking at those small communities of the 300s, the 2,000, the 10,000, even the 20,000, and looking to see what has been the aggregating factor or the irritant that has prevented us from making sure that we deliver water to those homes. And if we can continue to do that incrementally, that's where we're going to get our step. So I'm saying that to say that in order to get to where we need to be, those are the pockets we need to we need to deal with. But you must understand that there is a cost, which, if you look at it purely financially, may not be beneficial or economical to do it. But from a social and quality life standpoint, we have to do it. And therefore, while, for instance, depending on where you are, whether you're elevated area, a particular countryside, where there's some distance involved, getting pipe to that individual, or rather to that community, is a challenge. We have no choice but to do it. And that is why we've broken up our projects into many, many projects. I can tell you for one thing that at the moment we have 191 projects going on. And a lot of people don't know that. And a lot of them some of them have been successfully completed in recent times. And it's about just dealing with those small pockets of communities. And that is how incrementally we are delivering on the mandate about supplying water for all. So we are in a good spot where that is concerned in terms of progressing the way forward.
Is Wasa taking steps to ensure a more reliable truck-borne water supply? And I ask this on the backdrop of certain areas receiving, water at least once a month in San Francisco and environs and so on.
Yes. That goes twofold. Not only are we looking to make sure that the truck-borne reliable water is what it should be, but we're looking to relieve having to depend on that to the extent that we've had to depend on it. Maintenance of a fleet of truck-borne water is incredibly expensive. And in a worst-case scenario, as I would have learned in my past life, if you have a disaster and no amount of no amount of trucks can deliver sufficient truck-borne water in instances like that. So the key and central issue is making sure that pipe-borne water can be delivered, and that's where our primary focus has been. Truck-borne water should really be a backup. For the moment, we've had to rely on it because the infrastructure has not allowed us to be able to do it. But as we continue to develop our infrastructure, and as we continue to work with customers in terms of water conservation and different areas that we can push so everyone can help themselves, and so that the areas of surplus can hopefully, based on our pipeline, our infrastructure, assist with the areas of deficit. The more and more we manage that whole infrastructure, the more and more we manage the production and distribution of water, the better off the more and more we'll have success.
The Minister of Public Utilities, Marvin Gonzalez, he spoke at length a couple of months ago, and quite a number of years as well, in terms of a truck-borne racket, for want of a better word. But people paying for this truck-borne water supply, and which they should not be. Is this something he's spoken to you about, and is this something on your agenda?
We have quite a number of priorities. Corruption is certainly something that we see from time to time in various quarters, not only in Wasa, but other areas as well. That is something that I've heard mentioned. That is something that requires more investigation with solutions. But that is one area of the business that we need to drill down into and make sure that we can eliminate it and make sure that we do what we need to do. So yes, we have to look at that.
The transformation of Wasa, there's mixed views on it, both citizens and staff and so on. At this time, are you able to say whether there would be any job cuts at the Water and Sewerage Authority?
Well, Sunil, I've only been sitting in chair 5 minutes. So I cannot respond to that because that's not my mandate at the moment. My mandate is about getting Wasa right. And first and foremost is about making sure we deliver water to all and sundry. The benefit of the customer is we must keep in primary focus. And if the benefit of the customer means that we need more than the existing staff complement or less than the existing staff complement, those are things in due course we need to look at. But for the moment, we're all about getting staff focused in terms of delivering the water and using our best resources to do so.
The subcommittee report on the transformation of Wasa spoke about it being, among other things, cash-strapped, overstaffed, and unproductive. In September, the company appointed its new executive team, and as head of this team, how will you work to address some of these issues identified in that report?
The subcommittee report has highlighted issues that are very common across the Caribbean. So there's nothing new about that. To the extent that these issues are occurring to Wasa, that's what we have to focus on and make sure that we can turn around. The executive leadership team was put in place or installed after an intense review, going on to 2 years, of what is happening in terms of Wasa, taking that into account. But at the same time, we have discussed among ourselves, and we've been asked, and apart from installing the next level, which is the directors and assistant directors, to look and examine what makes sense. At the end of the day, whatever we determine, whatever is seen, has to be refined and refashioned on the ground. So in seeking to operationalize whatever that strategic plan is, whatever those suggestions are, nothing is hard and fast. And as we look at each of those issues in turn and examine it, we'll see how relevant it is or what the level of incident is, and then we can treat to it. But to respond carte blanche on that alone at this point in time, when engaging the staff, we're seeing a willingness to change and to do certain things. Let us first get to that phase. Let us first determine what makes sense and what is relevant, and then we'll see how those areas play out.
Based on some of your responses, you seem as though you've been following Wasa for quite a number of years. What do you think are some of the successes of Wasa over the last 4 or 5 years?
Well, Wasa, as I said, is a water utility, governed in the same way because it's wholly state-owned as many of the other utilities. But Wasa is a utility that most utilities in the Caribbean are aware of and look up to because of its scope and size. Wasa has tremendous successes and potential. I have seen what it has done in the last year in terms of turnaround, in terms of combating its challenges with respect to the production of water. I've seen what it has done in terms of challenging times post-COVID and otherwise, where staff may have been demotivated and have had to re-engineer their processes themselves. I've seen Wasa turn in the face of harsh criticism from the public in instances and at times when they have done excellent job and have been performing admirably. And some people only choose to see the negative. And one of the things I've been tasked with is to showcase the positive. Over the last week or over the last month, I saw a number of negatives in the newspapers, which were a third of the positive things that were happening that just were not publicized. And so we're going to try and change that around a little bit so people can see the difference that we've been making. But certainly, as part of some of the strengths, we have a most capable and extremely skilled and talented workforce. And I'm not so sure many people know that. And even though as we have taken on a set of young, eager engineers, trainees, they would tell you, and I would tell you, that they're the face of the future of Wasa. And they're there not only just because they're looking for a job, but they're intrigued and enthused. I just came, before I got here, from a training session in hydraulic modeling that at least 20 of those new engineers are attending. Hydraulic modeling is about using a form of technology and modeling, let's keep it simple, to look at the water balance or to look at the supply and usage of water across the island to see where should you look for sources, where are your best sources of water coming from, and such like. But to the point, Wasa has other strengths outside of this skilled staff. Wasa has a well-established distribution system which needs to be expanded. Wasa engages in technologies is not necessarily easily learned or in use across the Caribbean. Wasa has had a number of homegrown issues or facilities that they have done that many are not aware of. Recently, we celebrated the opening of the OCC Operational Center, and that is now the envy of the Caribbean. And all of the utilities in the Caribbean are asking Wasa to do the same or to help them to do the same. That was homegrown. That's those skill sets that were involved in developing that unique software and developing a platform that was more than just one that has SCADA, which is Supervisor Control and Data Acquisition, but one that has a number of other software and logical inputs to allow us to see what is happening in the ground. So eventually we'll be able to see in a particular, if water is off, these are the specific households by name, by meter number, that are, if applicable, that are being affected. So I don't think that Wasa is an engineering utility or firm that can easily be dismissed. It has a very cogent and it has a very significant contribution that it makes to this economy, whether it's at the macro level or whether it's simply in its execution of its duty to provide water across the island or the Republic. Wasa has had many successes, apart from what has been happening internally in terms of what I would call some of the re-engineering of the staff and a move towards being a sense of being a belonging or being motivated or being motivated. Tangibly, where the customer is concerned, we've had the advancement of a number of programs like CWIP and PSIP. CWIP basically stands for Community Water Improvement Program. And that is almost a homegrown program between Wasa and the ministry that is intended to address some of the fallouts, some of the inability that we've had before of Wasa to be able to produce or distribute enough water in a number of communities, whether they're rural or otherwise. And some of them may be as small as 300, some of them may be as large as 10 or 20,000. That has had tremendous success. And in the majority of cases, we have moved the needle from some folks not having water to as much as 24/7. In parallel or in conjunction with that, at a slightly larger level, and more at a national level, we've had the public sector improvement programs, water improvement programs as well. And that has dealt with some of the larger projects that we have been tackling based on annual budgets to make sure that we can push the needle forward and in terms of some of the projects that will benefit a larger catchment. So whether it is a treatment plant, whether it is a particular boost or repumping facility, that is designed to do that. And in addition to that, Trinidad has been successful in getting a US $350 million loan, which the first disbursement is just about finished, and we're on the cusp of drawing on the second, which has allowed us at the macro level or at the much more significant level to tackle some of the greater infrastructural needs, some of the costly needs to be able to move again the needle. So the conjunction of, and then there are other in-house projects. So in conjunction, the summation when you look at all of these projects in conjunction with each other, you can see why is it that Wasa has started to turn the needle, and why is it that we believe we are being more successful than ever before. If we are allowed to, and if we can, and there's no reason why we shouldn't, continue on this trajectory, we will get to where we intend to get, which is to supply water on a 24-hour basis to all and sundry in short order.
In the past year or so, we've seen, the commissioning of many booster stations across the country. Is this part of the community water improvement program?
Yes. Almost every week at one point, you were seeing the commissioning of one facility or another. Almost every week, you're seeing our staff or the ministry or the minister commemorating and celebrating the success. I think the next one is Saturday, if I'm not mistaken, because I've been invited to that, and that one is in South. This is a continuous thing, and this is what we want the media to be aware of, we want the public to be aware of, because we are no longer contented and we are no longer be prepared to sit quietly behind the scenes and not allow anyone to know what we're doing. We want to sing our praises just like anybody else. We want you to be aware of what we're doing so you understand. And we will also tell you what we plan, because it's important for you to know where we're going so that you can embark on that journey with us as well. So that it's exciting, really. We are in exciting times.
I believe there was also talk about a small desalination plant in the southwestern peninsula. I think it was either Point Fortin or Chatham. Can you say if you've been briefed on this?
What is being looked at is what we call package plants. You can have desalination plants, which are somewhat what we call containerized plants. And those are for areas that is really almost impossible to traverse the distance or to boost water to certain areas. And that may be a feasible option. So I've been briefed on the fact that that's something that's being looked at. I've also been told about Clapham and going further east in the south in terms of what we need to do. And as I get more briefed and as I get more details, I'll be able to speak to that a lot in a much more informed way.
Many a times the term harsh dry season is bandied about, where we see many of the long-term averages for the reservoirs falling below. Is this one of your major challenges in ensuring that long-term average doesn't fall below, especially during dry season?
We cannot control climate change. In fact, we no longer call it climate change. We believe that we're in a period of climate crisis. And the worst of that same experience that you've just identified, certainly in what should be the wettest period of the year, is what Trinidad is facing this year. It means that we have to be proactive. Part of the Wells program that has been developed this year that we're pushing heavily on is to make sure we can develop a number of localized sources of water, because we have to increase the resiliency of Wasa. We have to increase the resiliency of our ability to produce and supply water. So it is something that has to be managed very, very carefully. In the worst case scenario, you have to manage the supply or ration the supply. But outside of that, we can't wait until February, March, or April to take those steps. That's why those steps are being taken now. You have to make sure that you augment your water supply. You have to make sure that you improve some of your treatment plants. And in one instance, like the one in Guanapo, we're trying to make sure we create a dual intake so we can have additional water coming in. In the case of Santa Cruz, we're trying to make sure we develop one or two other localized sources of well so that we are less dependent, for instance, on the Caroni supply. Similarly, we need to be able to expand the Caroni supply further south, but that alone is not enough. So we're also developing a number of wells going south to make sure we can augment our supply. The demand for water, I believe, is 230 million gallons a day or similar. That is tremendous. That is significant. And whatever you do, regardless of the situation, and outside at any dry season, you must build in resiliency. So when you talk about the other options we're talking about from surface water, wells, desal if need be, or whatever the case may be, it is a multifaceted approach that we must undertake. And we must do it now. We can't wait until next year. We can't wait until the next decade.
When your tenure comes to an end, what's the one thing that you would like to say that you accomplished as the Chief Executive Officer of Wasa?
I would like to know that I've helped to move the needle on the progress in water, Wasa and water production significantly. I would like to know that I have left a workforce that is contented, happy, engaged, and proud. Because they have licked and shaken off whatever it is that has held them down for the last while. I would like to know that I would have done the people of Trinidad and Tobago proud in terms of the contribution that I would have given and in terms of the contribution that Wasa would have given in terms of performance. But more than anything else, I would like to know that customers can tangibly say, because of this transformation, because of this change, we have benefited and we are grateful and we are happy that this turnaround is happening.
Mr. Halliday, your final thoughts?
Thank you for that. Something that is missed by all is that there are a number of stakeholders that are involved in this process. WASA is not just simply a company of 4,000-5,000 employees or whatever the case may be. And while this is a company, an engineering firm at that, an authority, an entity that is producing water, there are a number of stakeholders that also play a critical part. Whether it's we partner with the unions, whether we're looking at our ministries, whether we're looking at staff management, or whatever the case may be, I want to throw out this to the media, that you're just as much a pivotal stakeholder as anybody. And I want to challenge you to do more than perhaps what I think has been happening, which is perhaps I'm asking you to do what you may not be in the habit of doing, which is to look at not only sensationalizing, the bad, but to highlight the good that Wasa is doing, and to make a deliberate effort to help us lift Wasa in that connection. At the end of the day, Wasa employs people who live among all of us, the ranks and the villages for all of us. And if we don't help those people to feel motivated, encouraged, and be a part of the success of what we think we're going to achieve or the direction we're going, Wasa will not turn around the way it should. All of us have a role to play in determining the final outcome of Wasa's productivity and Wasa's success.
We have been speaking to Mr. Keithroy Halliday. He's the newly appointed Chief Executive Officer of the Water and Sewerage Authority. He's part of that much talked about transformation plan for Wasa. Mr. Halliday, thanks very much for joining us on this week's episode. It's been a very informative discussion, and we look forward to the next few months where we see that transformation plan in effect and going forward.
Thank you very much.
Join us at the same time next week for another episode of Delving Deeper. I am Sunil Lalla. On behalf of the entire group, have a great night.